I'm Logan Crawford, and right now on Spotlight, we dive into the gripping world of Civil War history with Daniel Korn and his latest book, Tennessee Thunder, A Tale of Two Armies. This riveting story brings to life the fierce battles of Stones River and Chickamauga, exploring the contrasting commanders and the brutal combat that shaped the war's outcome. With detailed historical insight and vivid storytelling, the author transports readers to one of the bloodiest chapters of American history. We're delighted to have this very talented author join us here today on Spotlight. We thank the team at Bookside Press for helping us put him in the spotlight today, and we ask viewers like you to support authors like him by subscribing to our channel and by purchasing his amazing book. The links are below this interview. Daniel, great to see you here today on Spotlight.
Good afternoon, sir. Good to see you.
Great to have you on the show. This is an insightful book that explains parts of the Civil War I think a lot of people don't know about. Tell us a little bit about the significance of the battles of Stones River and Chickamauga.
Stones River is one of the bloodiest battles of the entire war. In fact, in terms of the numbers that were actually involved in the war, the percentages that were involved, percentage of casualties that took place in that battle are almost the highest in the entire war, second only basically to Gettysburg. Chickamauga is the last major victory of the war for the South. Of course, both battles are in Tennessee. A great deal of the war was actually fought in Tennessee. Everyone kind of focuses on Virginia, but in reality, the second most battles were in Tennessee themselves. And the war, in many ways, was won and lost in Tennessee. So,
what sparked your interest in exploring the war and being a Civil War historian?
well, I am a history teacher. Um, as a child, I was fascinated by a lot of what Walt Disney came up with to do. One particular program was a miniseries. He was actually originated the miniseries with his Wonderful World of Color program, and it was called Johnny Shiloh, and it was a story about John Lincoln Clem. And John Lincoln Clem, of course, was a very young, only like 10 years old drummer boy who went off to war with an Ohio regiment and eventually actually saw combat as a soldier. And I was fascinated by his story. And from that point on, and at that time when I was a young guy, was the time when the Civil War was actually entertaining its centennial. I read just about everything I could find on it, Mr. Bruce Caton's books and so on. And the more I read, the more I became even more fascinated by it. And then eventually I decided to become a teacher of history, and went to college. And while I was in college, I took a course on the Civil War from a very friendly professor, a gentleman I knew quite well. And part of the course was actually touring Civil War battlefields. And our last week, and while on the tour, I had what I can only describe as a supernatural experience on one of the battlefields, the battlefield of the Wilderness. Later on, I would find out that my ancestor had fought in that battle and was never found. He was dead, MIA, in action. And I felt like I had been touched from the grave, so to speak. And they really felt that way. And that inspired me between that and reading a book called Killer Angels, which of course became the movie Gettysburg eventually. I wanted to write a story, and everybody wrote about Virginia. I wanted to write about the war that everybody seemed to kind of forget about, which was out west. And that led to my novel about called Dawn's Gray Steel, which was about Shiloh. And then from there to Tennessee Thunder, which was the follow up to Dawn's Gray Steel. And I've had, one of the things that's kind of unique for me is that I've been a Civil War reenactor. So the battles that I'm writing stories about, the people I'm writing stories about, I have actually helped recreate those battles in the first place. So I've felt everything except the zing of the bullets going by my face, so to speak. I've smelled the burning gunpowder, et cetera, and all that kind of thing. But that has helped me to bring a sense of realism to the stories because I've actually done the stories, so to speak, myself.
Absolutely. That's very, very cool. Very interesting that you had a relative who was lost in that battle and you had that kind of afterlife experience that kind of, sparked your interest in studying the Civil War. Let's talk a little bit about William Starke Rosecrans and Braxton Bragg. What was the importance of contrasting their leadership styles?
Well, William Starke Rosecrans was a genius. Uh, he had been seriously injured in an accident, actually as an inventor, working with kerosene before the war, and that's one of the reasons why he had a beard, was he was covering the scars, the facial scars on his face. A very, very, very highly intelligent man, a man who had converted to Catholicism after West Point, and had literally had a priest following him around, his brother, on the battle campaigns. And he did a lot of talk about theology and everything with his staff and all of that. But he had a little problem, which a lot of people didn't realize, and that it was that he stammered. And the more tired he got, or the more excited that he got, the more he stammered. And he sounded like Donald Duck after a while if he got too worked up. So that was something about it. But he was a genius and in terms of the actual strategies and everything that he came up with. And he was a heck of a fighter. This is a man who had his chief of staff's head blown off right next to him, sprayed with the man's blood and guts and brain matter and everything, just wiped it off his face and just kept right on going. That's a tough guy. That's a tough guy. But unfortunately, at Chickamauga, he was too tired. He was simply too tired, and he was making decisions that were bad decisions. And because he was too tired, people couldn't understand him too when he was trying to talk. Braxton Bragg was a very interesting character. Most people do not realize or don't know that the fact that his mother was sexually assaulted while she was pregnant with him, and that she shot and killed her assailant, who happened to be an African American. And she was charged with murder and was acquitted. But I'm convinced that all of that stress and trouble that she went through during that trial and everything was transmitted to him in the womb. And he was a good soldier, but he had a very thin skin, did not get along well with subordinates at all. In fact, very few people he got along well with. But this is a guy who, when he was in the pre-war days, on a post, was the second in command, the chief of staff, in charge of the quartermaster, in charge of that, and a regimental commander for the artillery unit of the thing. As an artillery unit commander, he requested of himself, as the quartermaster, supplies. He turned himself down. He then went to himself as the second in command, requesting the same materials, and did the same thing. He turned himself down again. And his post commander later on said to him, "You are the only man I know of who can argue with himself and lose the argument."
Amazing. Amazing. That's an interesting anecdote from that era for sure.
Yeah.
Permission to board, sir. Permission denied, like he's giving himself orders. That's great.
So,
tell us how the
they were
battles
very different guys.
Yeah.
Very different.
Polar opposites. How did the battles of Tennessee change the course of the Civil War?
Stones, well, they took Nashville, and North took Nashville and kept Nashville. And as a result, that was the first major capital city to fall to the North during the course of the war. Grant, of course, with the wins in Shiloh and everything, they were able to take that. They held the city throughout the war. Because of that, the South was never able to gain that anchor in the West that they needed, and they were losing the control of the rivers. And once they lost the control of the rivers out west, they were in big trouble. And of course, the first ones to fall were the Cumberland, or the Ohio, the Cumberland, and then of course the Tennessee rivers. And those were the routes that the Union was able to use to drive their forces deep into the Confederacy, particularly at that point. So everybody was focused on the East, with Lee doing all his thing in Virginia, but the war was being lost in the West. In the East, the South did very, very well in the first few years. In the West, the South did not do very well in the first few years of the war. And this was what happened. And other than Chickamauga, most of the time they were losing. And you had the two armies, mostly the Army of the Cumberland, which was the main Northern Army in the West at that point, and then the Army of Tennessee. and then of the Tennessee, excuse me. The South named their armies after states or geographic regions. The North did after rivers, and is the reason, the two armies that represented Tennessee, they were constantly going head to head to head to head. The war was tougher in some ways out west, different breed of men than there were in the east.
Yeah.
And it was a rough fight. But in Chickamauga, Bragg won. But the reason why he won was because he had James Longstreet, Pete Longstreet from Lee's army, his corps, what was left of it after Gettysburg, was in that battle. And they're the reason why that they went through there and fought and won. Hood leading, of course, the charge that broke more or less the Union line. If another Virginian, if George Thomas hadn't done the job that the magnificent job he did of putting together the defense he did on Horseshoe Ridge, on Snodgrass Hill and everything like that, the war might have changed. Things might have been different, but he saved that army as a result of that. And they were able to retreat into Chattanooga. And then, of course, Grant came into the picture then. And after that, it was pretty much a done deal. Bragg was not going to do well. I find it interesting that how he and his cavalry commander, of course, he and Nathan Bedford Forrest had a very, very deep argument, shall we say, which I detail towards the end of the book, in which Forrest basically called him out for Bragg for his lack of leadership and all of that, and threatened to kill him. And this is your army, this is your boss, and you're telling him you're going to kill him if he ever tries to give you another order. What, can you see someone saying that to Robert E. Lee? I don't think so.
Yeah,
amazing.
So. Have you ever envisioned what this world or what this country would be like if the North had lost?
It would have been different. I think eventually the two sides would have reconciled. I think slavery eventually was going to die regardless.
Yeah.
No matter what. It would have been just a more painful death than it was then, and would have taken a lot longer. We weren't the last country to get rid of slavery in the Western Hemisphere. Brazil was, and that was 20 years after the Civil War.
Wow.
So, but we're the only country. Yeah, we're the only country to free the slaves and then give them the vote.
Yeah,
we're it.
So, very, very interesting. Well, there's your next book. What would happen? There's Man in the High Castle that takes a look at what would have happened if we had lost World War II. You can come up with your book on what happens if we lost the Civil War. It'd be fascinating. Yeah. All your books are fascinating. This one in particular, Tennessee Thunder, A Tale of Two Armies. The riveting story brings to life the fierce battles of Stones River and Chickamauga, exploring the contrasting commanders and the brutal combat that shaped the war's outcome. Before we leave you today, I got to ask you, have you thought about this as a film?
I've been, yes. And hopefully someday that'll happen. We'll see. Yeah. We'll see.
But once you get the book out there, you never know whose hands it's going to wind up in. So it could turn into a TV series or a movie, and that would be terrific. And I know where they can get one.
It would make me very happy. Obviously, it would make my students quite happy.
Absolutely. Yeah. A good class trip would be in order to get to the theater, without a doubt. Daniel, thank you so much for joining us here today on Spotlight.
Thank you, sir.
I appreciate your time. To the folks at home, I'm Logan Crawford, thanking you for your time this time. Until next time on Spotlight.